So let's continue with the ANC NEC outcomes, with the African National Congress calling all political parties represented in Parliament to form a government of national unity. The party says that they were already in talks with the EFF, the IFP, the NFP, as well as the PA. Some have urged that this was an easy way out of, have argued that this was an easy way out for the ANC. Let's now bring in Professor Adam Habib, who's the director of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Professor, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. I want to take you back to a thread that you wrote a couple of days just after the elections. And this is what you said. SA should be afraid. Very afraid of alliances that the ANC enters into. I wish I had a more promising picture of future developments, but I just don't, given the ANC's recent track record and those of the EFF, the MK, and even the DA. Should the country still be afraid?
I think that, so firstly, thank you for having me. I think that there are two fundamental issues if we are looking to think through about a country that succeeds. The first is who is part of a coalition or a government of national unity. And the second is the kind of decisive leadership we require. On the first, I think if you want to prioritize growth, if you want to prioritize poverty alleviation, if you want to prioritize stability, then the partner of choice should be the DA. I think there are huge challenges with the DA. I don't think it's been responsive to the interests of the black middle classes, or and it isn't very nuanced on the racialized politics of our history. Having said that, it is the most appropriate partner for growth, stability, poverty alleviation, and jobs. I have said publicly that I think an alliance with the EFF and MK is a dangerous alliance. The EFF is a fascist party. It has rigid ideas. It's violence prone, and it would undermine the long-term economic stability. It's also deeply, deeply corrupt. Jacob Zuma has been one of the most corrupt presidents in the history of this country. He sold this country, and there is abundant evidence of this. To do that is a replay of the last 10 years, and South Africa can't afford it. So I would say this, that the government of national unity makes the most sense because it is very difficult for the ANC to partner the DA because of the politics of race in this country. Partly because of within the ANC and partly because of the mistakes of the DA itself and the way it has addressed the racial challenges of our society. And so that makes a lot of sense. But I do think we need decisive leadership. This idea that President Ramaphosa carries on saying about playing the long game. Well, he was playing the long game so much that he forgot the short game. And the short game reduced his party's electoral support from 58% to 40%. He's got to start leading with a greater decisiveness. Those partners that are within a government of national unity or a coalition, if they start behaving in ways that destabilize the state, he's got to take firm action. We need decisive leadership in the country. Without that, we have no future.
Yeah. So with the government of national unity and the statement that was released by the ANC yesterday is that they're opening up the invitation to all political parties represented in Parliament, the MK parties represented in Parliament, the EFF represented in Parliament as well. So who would then decide which political party to keep out of the government of national unity?
So the question is, to be honest, who gets in and what are the terms of the government of national unity? That's the fundamental question. On what is the fundamental principles the government of national unity is constructed. And it can't be completely abstract. It has to say, here are the policy principles on which this government of national unity will be founded. And I think that's the real question. Who comes in is going to determine the success of the government of national unity. Whoever gets in, President Ramaphosa needs to start leading with a greater decisiveness.
Yeah.
He can't be everything to everybody. But the real question is who gets in. Frankly, if the EFF refuses to go and NK MK refuses to go in a government of national unity, I think it will be a blessing in disguise. I think it will create a greater stability, and it will be in the interest of the country in the long term. Their track record has been one of destabilization. Look at every coalition government at municipal or regional level that the EFF has been involved in, and it's been unstable.
But couldn't that same argument be made against the Democratic Alliance, where it was in coalition governments? Look at the city of Joburg, look at the city of Ekurhuleni as well, including the city of Tshwane.
That is absolutely true, but you do have the DA that has, at least at the municipal level in the Western Cape, has a level of political administration, municipal governance that is better than everything else. And when I'm looking at this, I'm not looking at issues of inequality.
Yeah.
I am looking at issues of delivery, water, lights, clean streets, no potholes. Those are the things that should be constructed and reflected upon at municipal level. Look at that compared to Pretoria, Johannesburg, and Durban, and there's a big difference.
But why do we divorce the equation of inequality from that discussion, considering that we speak of a country that is highly unequal, and also when it comes to the inequality in this country, it is also by racial lines. For instance, the president of South Africa, the former president is Thabo Mbeki, spoke before about the two South Africa. So fundamentally, even if you look at the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution speaks about acknowledging the injustice of the past. We also includes the question around inequality.
So that's absolutely true, and I entirely agree with you. But how do you address inequality in a society? You deal with it at the level of national government. It's the economic policy. It's the policy of treasury. It's how you construct social policy. And that's why I think that's the level that you would do it at. I mean, for me, it's the principles on which you actually construct that. Think about this. What was the impact of corruption over the last 10 years? Who did that corruption impact on? When Eskom collapsed, when Transnet collapsed, who does it impact on? In the end, it impacts on the poor. It accelerated the inequalities of our society. That happened under Jacob Zuma. It happened under his leadership. So between you and me, the ANC's record has not been sterling on economic policy, but it's addressed at the national level, and it requires decisive leadership by the president himself. That's where I think we need, it's on the basis of the principles on which the government of national unity. It's not about the political rhetoric that people make. It's about the choices in policy and in decision making and in spending that will address inequality, not the rhetoric that has become the mainstay of politicians of all parties.
Yeah, aren't you giving the ANC there an easy pass by blaming former President Jacob Zuma? Because he came into the party as well, and corruption was already at play, and we know of some of the cases, for instance, relating to corruption. Let's think about the former police commissioner, Jackie Selebi, as an example. So corruption was already there even before Jacob Zuma became the president of the country. So shouldn't the ANC itself be taking responsibility for that, even on its own failures to hold former President Jacob Zuma accountable while he was president of the country and president of the ANC?
I think that that's absolutely right. But let's be honest, there is corruption and there is corruption. Was there corruption under Thabo Mbeki? Absolutely there was. But when Jacob Zuma came to power, it was corruption accelerated on a scale we've never seen on a century.
Who created that environment? Who created that environment for that corruption to be accelerated at that particular pace?
Well, the ANC may take collective responsibility for not holding Jacob Zuma accountable, but please do not let Jacob Zuma off the hook.
Yeah.
You cannot say it was only the party. So by all means, I've argued publicly that the ANC has failed in maintaining corruption. It has failed in appointing the right people to jobs. But do not take the blame away from Jacob Zuma. He accelerated it. He is an individual that accelerated it and was one of the architects of that process. He should be responsible. And it is an embarrassment that he would come in and be voted with the support that he has after what he has done to this country.
What does that mean, also considering that you have over 2 million people that have voted for former President Jacob Zuma? And I remember asking even an analyst, what does this tell us about the MK party voter, considering the period of instability that you speak of, and also the period of corruption? And of course, there is the State Capture Commission of Inquiry's report, which the former president still dismisses.
I think it's a phenomenon we see around the world. So you would argue, if you looked at the United States, how is it that large parts of the Republican Party vote for Trump, even though he's a billionaire and his ideas and his thoughts and his policies violate the interests of those people anyway? It's the same phenomenon. So you're absolutely right. More than 2 million people vote for MK. I think that it says a lot about the deep, deep inequalities in our society, how it politically polarizes our society, and how it allows for a populism, a crude populism, to emerge, where politicians who play the ethnic card, who play the racial card, who play the anti-elite card, are able to win votes. It shows the deep, deep anger among our people and how wily politicians have been able to manipulate that in their own personal interest. We've seen that around the world. We see it in India. We've seen it for a time in Brazil. South Africa is a manifestation of that really populist politics that emerges in very, very unequal societies.
And finally, looking at what the president speaks about here, agreements between parties should be in writing. They should be public, transparent, include measures of holding parties accountable, considering the picture that you've painted of the history of the Democratic Alliance and the history of the ANC. If the government of national unity were to go the route that excludes the MK party as well as the EFF, the Democratic Alliance will then, of course, play a dominant role. But what does it mean in terms of holding each other accountable once that government of national unity is in place?
So I think that there are two things. Firstly, a government of national unity, and as the president says it, is open to everybody. And so the EFF is invited and MK is invited. And ideally, the real question will be, what are the terms?
Yeah.
What are the policy terms on which the government of national unity is constructed? As you said, I think inequality and addressing inequality should be a fundamental element of those terms, as is growth, as is poverty alleviation, etc. The question is, I think having transparency in that regard is absolutely important. It's in the broader interest because we can then judge that. But it also requires leadership. It requires a president capable of leading and having the political will to lead. That is absolutely crucial if we are going to succeed. We are in a precarious moment in South Africa's history. The deep, deep polarization. There's deep anger amongst our electorate who feel let down after 30 years. Deep, deep corruption, deep, deep incompetence has not made the lives of many, many poor people better.
Yeah.
And the ANC needs to be held accountable for that. But everybody needs to be held accountable for that. And the opposition parties have not been great at the level of national government and articulating appropriate policies.
Okay. Finally, the EFF, earlier on you spoke about the track record of the EFF. Let's speak about the track record of the EFF being part of a coalition, whether it is in the city of Joburg or the city of Ekurhuleni. Do you think that they failed there?
I think what we've seen is there are two problems with the EFF, in my view. One is what I've called its fascist tendencies. You've heard me on that. The second is its track record. In every one of those coalition governments, it takes one position one day, it unravels it and breaks the alliance the next day. They behave in the public affairs like little children, insolent children. And that's the problem. It's an unstable partner. It is probably, of all the parties, even more so than MK, It is the most unstable political partner one could have in the post-apartheid era. And for that reason alone, it seems to be, it's highly unreliable. And that's why, if I were the ANC, if I was in a government of national unity, I would think it's not a bad thing if they stayed away.
Thank you so much for your time, Professor Adam Habib. And of course, the EFF would argue that they didn't go into any coalition agreements with the various political parties where there are hung municipalities, but they're voting on a case-by-case basis. But then also taking into consideration that in the city of Joburg, as well as the city of Ekurhuleni, they have formed part of the government in those metros. Still to come.